a pleasure to have you join Money Matters on TV 360 Nigeria. I'm Okpeyemi Owosheni. We start off with business news. The Minister of Communications, Innovation and Digital Economy, Bosun Tijani, has reiterated that the Nigerian government would not allow telecommunication companies to increase tariffs by 100%. For some years now, the telecoms companies have been asking for an increase in tariff, citing rising operational costs, inflation and naira devaluation, among other factors. Speaking during a recent televised interview, Tijani says the government acknowledged that a tariff increase in the telecom sector is due, but said the government cannot grant the 100% the companies are demanding. According to him, it is necessary to look at the numbers, the implications the increase will have on the people, and the sustainability of the sector for proper balancing. We'll go on a break now and be back with company news. Welcome back. The African Export-Import Bank has pledged to support aircraft financing for Nigerian airlines. The agreement was reached during a productive side meeting at the ongoing Aviation Economic Conference in Dublin, Ireland, led by Festus Keyamo, the Minister of Aviation and Aerospace Development. The meeting brought together stakeholders from the aviation industry. The leading development financing institution announced plans to launch a leasing subsidiary that will soon deliver 25 aircraft for lease to African airlines. This initiative is expected to provide Nigerian airlines with access to dry leased aircraft, enabling them to enhance operations on bilateral air service agreement, route and domestic networks. We'll take a break now, but when Money Matters return, we'll be discussing Nigeria's inflation rate rising to 34.80% in December 2024. I'll bring you details after this break. Welcome back. Due to the increases in demand for goods and services during the festive period, Nigeria's headline inflation rate jumped to 34.80% in December 2024, up from 33.60% in November 2024. Now, that's according to the National Bureau of Statistics in its latest Consumer Price Index report. The agency revealed that the December 2024 headline inflation rate showed a marginal increase of 0.20% when compared to the November 2024 headline inflation rate. Meanwhile, the food inflation rate in December stood at 39.84% on a year-on-year basis, 5.91% higher compared to the rate recorded in December 2023, that's 33.93%. Now, I'm now being joined by Economist Segun Sopiton to discuss the new increase in the nation's inflation rate. Thank you for your time, Mr. Sopiton. Now, as I said, given the recent rise in Nigeria's headline inflation rate to 34.80% in December 2024, what do you believe are the primary factors behind this increase, particularly in the context of the festive season's demand surge?
Well, I mean, to be honest with you, I don't think that the demand surge that we saw in December had too much of a bearing on the numbers that we're looking at now. If we are going to even see any impact of that, I think we'll see it in the January numbers because of the lagging effect. There's a slight delay between when events happen and when they're captured in data. There's also the issue of policy implementation and when you see the impact of those policies in the data. But in this case, it's just that it's unlikely that the dirty December, as we call it, is reflected in these numbers significantly. So the numbers we're seeing basically just reflect the fact that nothing has changed. And you and I know that that is the case. Nothing has changed. Exchange rate is still what exchange rate has been for the last 3, 4, 5 months, trending somewhere around 1,500 to 1,650 in the official market and the parallel markets, respectively, in that period. MPR has continued to get hiked by the CBN. The other major things that drive inflation, the price of petrol, even though we've seen a marginal reduction on the back of some sort of price competition between Dangote and the NNPC, we're still around, we're still hovering close to 1,000 naira per liter. So those things haven't changed, and therefore it would be unrealistic to expect any significant reduction in inflation. What we have seen, however, is that inflation has not increased significantly because nothing has changed significantly. And I think that's what it is. Maybe in the January numbers, you might get a bit of the impact of the festive season spending, and we'll see the numbers bump up a bit more for the January numbers. But beyond that, I think we're just seeing the same trend that we've experienced in the second half of the year, just being sustained.
Okay, now that the festivities are over, and even though you've mentioned that December did not have any significant impact on inflation rates, MBS has insisted that that's the main reason why inflation increased. So now what would you say is the impact of the festive season demand on the inflation numbers as observed in December 2024? And does it generally create a temporary surge or long-term effect?
I mean, December. Okay, so this December, this year's December was particularly unique because of that phenomenon that we call the dirty December.
This is it, yeah.
Nigerians being who we are, we tend to be very trend following as a people, as a society. When a particular thing starts, everybody follows, right? So. What we saw was a lot of diasporans coming back into the country, bringing along with them a lot of tourism dollars, tourism money, bringing along with them, in some cases, foreigners as well, to come and enjoy the party scenes in Lagos and in other parts of the country, Calabar, maybe Abuja, maybe Port Harcourt. So that's something that is new, actually. We've had that in the past, but now we've given it a tag, and it looks as if this is going to be a pattern going into the future. So in terms of long-term effects of this, I think what we will see is that maybe activities during December will increase more than what we are used to. Typically, you would expect increase in activity because of Christmas, the New Year festivities. But it looks as if we're also getting some tourist business as well added to that. Besides that, and besides the additional trade that will generate, I don't think we're going to see any significant long-term impact of this on the economy.
Throughout 2024, food inflation was something we battled with in the country, and it was one of the primary factors that drove inflation in 2024. And December was no exception, as it stood at 39.84%. Now, how do supply chain disruptions, currency devaluation, and seasonal factors like farming cycles affect the cost of essential food items in Nigeria?
These are the basic things that drive our inflation. You know that the logistics supply chain issue affects food inflation significantly. Our infrastructure foundation, is simply too weak to get goods and services across the country in a cost-effective manner. So what tends to happen is that whether you're talking about goods that are coming from up country down to Lagos, down towards the coast, or you're talking about items, products, and services that are moving from the coastal areas up country, the cost of the logistic cost, involved in that significant, and they have a major bearing on the final cost to the consumer, and it shouldn't be so. This is just simply an inefficiency cost. It's an inefficiency. Punitive inefficiency input into the cost of items. So until we have rail systems, smooth roads that can ensure that goods and services can move cost effectively across the country, this would always be a factor, in inflation and in the consumer price index. Of course, like you say, issue of devaluation, we're still struggling with that. One would have hoped that the CBN would have done more to help improve the value of the naira against the dollar in the last half of last year. That didn't happen. And I'm not holding my breath expecting that to happen this year either. So that and all the other things that you mentioned remain a factor. And I think it is what it is. What we get is what we get, and where we are is where we are, unless something significant changes, in the short to medium term.
Now, Mr. Shepito, you agree with me that even though inflation just increased by 0.20% in December 2024, Nigerians are still battling with living crisis. Now, given the worsening cost of living crisis, especially with food commodity, inflation is at record highs. What socioeconomic impact are Nigerians likely to face in the coming months in 2025?
I mean, it's the same. Look, the reality, and this reality appears to be getting increasingly lost on policymakers and on observers of the economy. The reality is that people are struggling. The socioeconomic impact of this inflation number that we just see, and we just treat it as a number, 34.8%. So, like you say, it's just, some would argue it's just a 0.20% increase. But that's not the point. The point is that at 38.8%, the cost of goods and services, remember that inflation is, when you see the CPI, this inflation number is an average. So the cost of goods and services that people are paying currently is forcing them to have to make adjustments that leave them extremely uncomfortable. So people are struggling. Let me give you an example. For a lot of people who have lived relatively comfortable lives, they consider themselves middle class. They can fuel their cars, go wherever they want to, whenever they want to. They live, their car is air conditioned, their office is air conditioned, their houses are air conditioned, so they live a fairly comfortable life. Now, with inflation, with the things that are driving inflation to 34.8%, which includes things like the cost of petrol, the cost of electricity, they've had to make adjustments. Some people don't turn their ACs on anymore, whether in the car, in the office, or at home. They have bans, period when they just switch on the AC for a brief period, maybe when they want to sleep, in some cases. Some don't even, I was speaking with somebody that she was saying she hadn't used her AC in months, and that's crazy because it's not, air conditioning is not a luxury. It's a basic need. It helps you remain comfortable, helps your productivity, and all of that. So people are struggling. People are making adjustments. People can't pay for subscription, for cable TV anymore. People have to moderate, the data consumption, and so on and so forth. And some will say, oh, now, yes, we're now living an efficient and more less wasteful life. But I beg to disagree. I think that the things that people are giving up are the very things that drive creativity and productivity. So social economic impact of this has been very negative, and sadly, I don't see it getting better anytime soon because the people that are making the policies that are creating this discomfort are determined to continue that trend. So everybody will just continue to make adjustments and hope for the best.
There might actually be light at the end of the tunnel because during the 2025 budget presentation, President Bola Tinubu set an ambitious target of reducing inflation rate to 15% in 2025. Now, based on the current economic trends, with inflation currently at 34.80%, do you think this goal is achievable in the short term? And then what strategies do you think need to be implemented to meet such a target, bearing in mind that 15% is a very, very large number, considering the fact that we are currently at 34.80%?
So what the president is basically saying is that he's planning to shave off 20%,
yes,
of the current inflation numbers for us to achieve that. Because like you say, we're 34.8. So, to achieve 15, you need to take 20% off. That 34. Is it possible? Yes. It's extremely possible. Will it happen? Doubt it very strongly. So the second part of your question says, what can be done or what needs to be done to achieve that? For me, it's really very simple. It's not difficult at all. Target exchange rates. What are the key drivers of inflation right now? Exchange rates. So target that. Get your exchange rate down to 1,200, 1,000 naira to 1,200 naira range in the next 3 months. That's one. If you're able to achieve that, the multiplier effect across the entire economy will be significant. The cost of petrol will go down, which also has its own multiplier effects. Cost of food will go down. Again, multiplier effects there. Cost of transportation will go down, and so on and so forth. And you could see inflation actually trend to around, maybe 20% by the end of the year, just by targeting exchange rates aggressively, Excuse me. Now, what can be done about the exchange rates? The CBN recently introduced the diaspora non-resident Nigerian ordinary accounts and non-resident Nigeria investment accounts. This is something that some of us have been advocating for a long time. What's it called? Products that deliberately target the 20 to 25 billion dollars that Nigerians send home every year. Now, I was speaking with a diaspora and a family member recently, and he was saying, do you know that this 20, 25 billion dollars is like it's pocket money for this field to them. It's money that is completely insignificant. There are a lot of Nigerians that are doing amazingly well all over the world. The United States, the UK, North America, Australia, Europe. They're doing extremely well. Asia. Now, it will not kill them to send $100 billion into this country every year if we create the structures and the investment platforms and outlets to attract that money. So instead of them sending pocket money to their siblings, to their family members, instead of sending little bits of money to, I want to buy a phone, and then your brother sends money. If you create a system that will draw in the resources available within the reach of these Nigerians, you can generate a lot of inflows. So this diaspora non-resident Nigerian investment account in particular is a fantastic initiative, but we need to do more. The CBN still needs to go one step further and relax the exchange control policies. I've been talking about this forever. We've got a document called the Foreign Exchange Memorandum, of the CBN. It has several sections dealing with the different aspects of the foreign exchange market and controlling them very stringently. That document needs to be revised. That document, we've had it for decades now. The world has moved on. There are far more effective ways of tracking and controlling currency flows to prevent money laundering, to prevent illicit flows and all of that, which are part of the reasons to prevent capital flight, and maybe round tripping. Those are the reasons you've got those controls in place. There are better ways, more effective ways of controlling those things and keeping a lead on them now than restricting access to money. If you restrict access to money for people that are bringing this monies in, if they can't use them as they please, within regulatory restrictions, then they will not bring the monies through the official quarters.
The things that are good for us. Now, let's talk about external factors. Can you explain how external factors such as global commodity prices or trade relations might be influencing inflation rates in Nigeria? Because I understand that it's not just internal factors alone that influence inflation in Nigeria.
Look, I mean, the irony is that at the moment, the world, the global economy, is witnessing a period of relative stability. We're seeing relative growth numbers, and we're seeing inflation being brought very, very strongly under control. In most developed economies, the GDP numbers are outperforming inflation. The numbers with regards to returns on investment instruments are now providing positive yield. In other words, those instruments are promising returns that are higher than the inflation rates. In many of these territories, we're looking at inflation at 2%, 2.1%, 2.5%, So talking about external shocks, I think the time for that has passed. The impact of things like the Ukraine Russia war, the instability in the Middle East, the pandemic is well and truly behind us, for all intents and purposes, even though we're beginning to hear some whispers from China again about some new virus that they've managed to cook up again. But at the moment, things are stable, globally. The shocks that happen to the global logistic networks and supply chain networks, we've recovered from most of it. There's still some disruptions here and there, but most of it has been taken care of. Um, Developed governments and developed economies, developed CBNs have even now reduced, the interventionist policies they had to adopt in the aftermath of COVID that drove inflation heavily. So all of that imported inflation is no longer at play. So the external shocks that we're talking about are not really significant anymore. And I think that what we're going through right now are self-inflicted pains that are very, very much, within our control to fix. Maybe if you want to talk about external factors, you want to talk about the fact that we have a terrible debt overhang, 40 something, 41 billion US dollars or thereabouts now in debt, external debt alone. Is terrible. And what that does is that it actually does leave you vulnerable to the dictates of the people that you owe that money. So if you want to look at that as an external shock, yes, I would agree that that has an impact because it limits the freedom you have to pursue the policy directions that you wanted to pursue. But besides that, I don't see any serious external issues affecting us at the moment. I think all our problems are problems that were created by ourselves and that we can easily resolve by ourselves as well.
So we've seen inflation in 2024, but then it's a new year, a fresh start. Now, what would you say is your inflation forecast for Nigeria in the first quarter of 2025, considering the recent trends and government policies?
Um, Without having run any models, I wouldn't expect us to see any significant change. I think we're still going to see inflation continue to rise, but very marginally. We probably will end Q1, first quarter of 2025, trending somewhere around 35% as inflation rate. We're on 34.8. Probably will see that climb to maybe 35 for January, and I don't see us
Thank
witnessing
you.
any strong inflationary pressure in the first quarter of the year. Again, because like I said before, the major things that drove inflation to the point where it is now, we've kind of plateaued, we've stabilized. So for me, the only way is down. But that downward trend will only happen with very clear policy action, and it will not happen because of any NPR hikes. So if the CBN, as we would expect, will be contemplating hiking NPR further because money supply is still very high, and it's not going to make any difference, right? So I don't think that we'll see any significant increases in inflation, but I also don't think that we'll see any significant reduction in inflation. I think we're just going to trend at this range for this first quarter.
All right, so just before I let you go briefly, in light of the recent security breach of the National Bureau of Statistics website on December 18th, 2024, how can we be sure of the accuracy and integrity of the data provided in December 2024 inflation report? Do you think Nigerians should be concerned about the reliability of those figures, given the potential for tampering or data manipulation by external forces, I meant to add?
Look, I mean, this is a very interesting question you ask. Um, Ordinarily, for me, that's not, it's a non-issue. Um, every now and then, very large national organizations all over the world suffer cyber attacks. I'm absolutely certain, because there are standard security protocols that are typically in place for large data, banks like that of the MBS. I don't think that that compromise would have affected the data, that they have stored, or the numbers that they are holding, in their archives. I don't think that's a problem. But what I do see as a problem, talking about whether Nigerians can rely on the numbers from the MBS, is this new uh, uh, apparent tendency or trend to want to manipulate the figures by the MBS itself. And that's very, very disturbing. And it's something that we have to call out. And it's something we have to demand stops. Last year, the MBS revised the methodology it adopts for computation of unemployment or computation of employment, adopted a protocol that is extremely unrealistic and does not speak to our local context of Nigeria, and, and, and left us saying that unemployment dropped from 33% as at that time to 5%. In fact, I think the last number they released was 4 point something percent. That is as ridiculous as it can get in terms of data manipulation. The data from the MBS on unemployment doesn't speak to the reality on ground. And what you found now is that people are ignoring it. So consumers of data, policymakers, investment analysts, they are no longer relying on that unemployment number for Nigeria because they know it's not true. Now we hear that the NBS is about to rebase the GDP and rebase our inflation numbers. We're changing our base year for the GDP to 2019. And the word out there, and I'm sure you must have seen the news, is that we're changing our base year for inflation to 2024. If we do that, we're doing ourselves grievous harm. Because what that will do is to eliminate the historical components of our inflation numbers. When you talk about inflation, you are talking about prices today as compared to where they were in the past. There is a reference point. If your reference point is too close, you do not get the real picture. So how can we be saying inflation will be computed based on 2024 when 2024 is sitting in the middle of price shocks? So you do not get the benefit of comparing your current prices to the prices within the economy before those shocks happened, before subsidies were removed and all of that. So you will get a number that does not reflect reality. If we put ourselves in a position where inflation numbers and GDP numbers from the NBS begin to get questioned by the people that use those numbers, we are putting ourselves in very, very grievous mortal danger that could affect the entire economy and the investment climate, the investment outlook for the country, the attractiveness of the country from the outside world, and be jeopardized. So for me, this is the real danger, not the cyber attacks that they experience, but that by ourselves, we want to appear that we're trying to tamper with numbers, possibly for political reasons. And I think that would be very, very unfortunate. So I want to use this opportunity to call the people that are behind this to stop and to call on the National Assembly to put a stop to this. It's very, very bad for Nigeria as a country, for our economy, and for the going into the future, the economic outlook of the country.
Well, Economist Segun Shokpito, many thanks for lending your thoughts on the program, and we hope to see changes in the coming months of 2025 in inflation rate. Well, that's it on this episode of the program. Many thanks for joining us. I'm Okpeyemi Uwosheni. See you next time.